Dear colleagues, it is my great pleasure, as well as an honor, to introduce this video recording of the second day of lectures by Ukrainian scholars in Athens. Unfortunately, I was not able to do this online at the time, but I'm happy to have the opportunity now to say a few words on behalf of the Societas Linguistica Europaea, the Linguistic Society of Europe. The SLE is devoted specifically to the promotion of international collaboration between linguists in Europe. This goal is seriously undermined since the Russian invasion of Ukraine now already over a year ago. This makes, of course, international travel to and from Ukraine very hard, sometimes for some even impossible. I therefore very much welcomed Professor Nikos Lavidas' initiative to organize this series of lectures at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and I'm proud that the executive board of the SLE unanimously decided to sponsor the event. I thank Professor Lavidas for his efforts, and our Ukrainian colleagues for theirs, and for their contributions, which all reflected on boundary-crossing topics very much in the spirit of the goals of SLE. Finally, I want to sincerely express the hope that the situation for our Ukrainian colleagues, in fact, for all of the people of Ukraine, will soon develop for the better. Who knows? Perhaps it will be possible to meet in Athens in person towards the end of August at the annual SLE conference taking place there. In the meantime, take care.
Hello, dear guests. Hello, my dear colleagues. Today we continue to discuss the question of translation of the classical Greek literature into Ukrainian. And today I am going to dwell on some more questions. Here they are. So we will talk about the European traditions of translating Homer into national languages, mastering of ancient rhyming by Ukrainian poets, the first translators of Homer in Ukraine, and I will particularly pay attention to Homeriana by Boris Ten. So to the first question, European traditions of translating Homer into national languages. As noted before, the translation of Homer's poems was iconic both for the ancient Romans and later for the Europeans. Andessier made a French translation of Iliad in 1699 and Odyssey in 1708. And in her letter, she wrote that her work was aimed not at those who read ancient Greek, but at those who are not familiar with the ancient poet or trying to read the original. In any case, her labor will not be lost and will serve to make him known to the former and intelligible to the latter. Samuel Johnson, analyzing the translations of Homer made by Alexander Pope, notes that Greeks practically did not translate and did not turn to the barbarians in search for poetic lines, since they already had Homer. Samuel Johnson praised the translations of both poems and numerous comments made to the texts. Matthew Arnold, researching the English translation of Homer, suggests that readers and translators should turn to Homer not because he is included in the course of classical literature, but because his works are the most important poetic masterpieces. And the number of readers, as he says, increases. Attention will be more and more directed to the poetry of Homer, not indeed as part of a classical course, but as the most important poetical monument existing. The issue of preserving ancient rhyming in translations of Homer was also relevant for foreign scientific research. In particular, August Wilhelm Schlegel noted the ability of the German language to reproduce the rhyming of ancient art and the fact that this gives it a distinct advantage over other languages, which may be more modern and even partially more elevated, by whose development has been less well-rounded. Hans Joseph Vermeer noted that Homer's Odyssey was also translated in the form of a novel, which changed its text variety. He writes, its text variety that thus changed from epic to novel. Eugene Nida substantiated that the translation of some poetry into prose can be dictated by important cultural considerations. The English poetic form seems ancient and strange, with nothing of the liveliness and spontaneity characteristic of Homer's style. The English are not used to listening to stories in the poetic form. For this reason, Émile Victor Rieu chose prose rather than poetry as the more appropriate medium through which to render Iliad and Odyssey. The next slide, please. Mastering of ancient rhyming by Ukrainian poets. The assimilation of ancient verse in Ukraine, as in most Slavic countries, began together with the systematic study of the theory of artistic language in poetics courses taught from the middle of the 17th century at Kiev-Mohyla Academy. It was founded in 1632. It was taught in Latin. An important place in the curriculum was given to poetry and rhetoric, which were often combined into one course. In the poetics, the main forms of ancient versification were considered. In particular, rhyming. The exposition was accompanied by numerous examples, mainly from Roman poets. At the same time, some professors used their own works written in Latin as illustrative material. Information on ancient poetry was provided by teachers of the theory of poetry with varying degrees of completeness. However, issues related to the hexameter sphere and its characteristics were definitely covered. Emphasis was usually put on expressiveness and flexibility of rhyming. For Fan Prokopovich's treatise on poetic art, a course of lectures delivered in 1705 to the students of Kiev-Mohyla Academy, stands out for its original and apt observations on the features of the hexameter. It is a convincing attempt to understand the rules that those who use this meter had to follow. The presentation, which was based on the direct analysis of ancient texts, took into account the experience of predecessors, authors of courses on the theory of poetry, both Ukrainian and Western European. In 1786, due to the initiative of Grigory Konevsky, Prokopovich's treatise was published in Mohyliv. Researchers of Kiev poetics emphasize the influence that this work had on their authors in terms of the presentation of the hexameter theory. Some of the recommendations for composing hexameters are available in it. They are placed in Chapter 3, entitled On Narration and first of all about flaws and luck in the hexameter. It has separate subsections, flaws in the hexameter and virtues and refinement of the hexameter. It still retains practical value for poets and translators of the ancient Greek and Latin texts. Ukrainian specialists face serious challenges to translate Homer into Ukrainian while respecting the content, style, and most importantly, the rhyming of the ancient author. The assimilation of ancient verse is connected with the study of the theory of artistic language in the poetics courses taught at Kiev-Mohyla Academy, as I have already mentioned. In the course of lectures by Feofan Prokopovich, original observations and rules for the use of hexameter, which were based on the analysis of ancient texts, were outlined. However, there is no evidence of works written in those days using ancient rhyming, and in recitations and translations, poets, according to tradition, continued to use syllabic verse. The first attempts to imitate the Ukrainian hexameter belong to Kostomarov and Dumitrashka. It's the 19th century, who developed the most promising model, mixed dactylochoric 6-foot rhyming with unrhymed lines and feminine line endings. There was a relatively small number of hexameter works belonging to the pioneers of the Ukrainian hexameter. Kostomarov and Dumitrashko were quite diverse in terms of its functionality. It was used both in original and translated poetry. More precisely, it was, so to say, resung, and both high and low styles were used. Both forms of hexameter were used, the one associated with the Greek hexameter, which was definitely dominated by lines of pure D6 and feminine caesura, and the other which resembled the Latin hexameter, with a significant number of choric feet in the text and the predominance of masculine caesuras. Learning more towards the Greek version of the hexameter, the works of Kostomarov and Dumitrashko laid a solid foundation for the development of the Ukrainian hexameter. So to the next question, the first translators of Homer in Ukraine. Giving Ukrainians the opportunity to read the best works of the world treasury in their native language became the goal of the Ukrainian cultural and literary figures. In general, the fate of numerous translations by another member of the Cyril and Methodius Society, Alexander Navrotsky, was unfortunate. After his imprisonment and exile in 1847, he was unable to return to Ukraine. Unfortunately, the majority of Navrotsky's original poems and translations have not yet been published and are kept in autographs. Some have been lost. Among his interpretations are excerpts from the Bible, a psalm of the prophet David, Song of Songs, a complete translation of Homer's Iliad, using 6-step chorea, close to the rhyming of a folk song, and an incomplete, due to the defectiveness of the survived manuscript, Odyssey, separate chapters of songs about the Nibelungs and Shotaro Staveli's poem, The Knight in the Tiger's Skin. The translator's title is Dressed in Leopard Fur. A word about Igor's regiment, the poem Laila and Majnun by Nizami, Serbian epic songs, Ossian's works, and so on. His translations of Mickiewicz's poems, Ode to Youth and Ferris, published in 1865 in Lviv magazine Niva, were highly praised by Ivan Franko, noting the translator's talent and diligence. Stepan Rudansky's conceived plans to write his largest monumental translated work, the Ukrainian interpretation of Homer's Iliad. This translation was made in 1862 and 1863 and published in Lviv Pravda in 1872 and 1877. The translation was published as a separate edition in Lviv in 1903, edited and with a foreword by Ivan Franko. For the translation of Iliad, the translator's title of the work is Ilyanyanka. Rudansky chose a 12-syllable syllabic tonic poem with a caesura in the middle, which is folk in its origin. It's worth mentioning that in Ilyanyanka there are no rhymes except for occasional ones. In this poetic meter, suitable for the full-fledged, in particular from today's point of view, is it really appropriate for a full-fledged reproduction of Greek epic? The answer to this can hardly be unequivocal. On the one hand, the translation of Ilyanyanka has all signs of Ukrainization in itself, in particular realities, names, titles, obsolescences in the vocabulary and phraseology. All of these seem very strange, taking into account the fact that Rudansky knew well the first Ukrainian hexameter translation by Dumitrashko. There is a mention of this in his correspondence. As Alexander Biletsky noted, Stepan Rudansky did not want to, so to say, transport the reader-listener to the distant Homeric era, to other cultural and historical conditions, to enable him to look at the world with the eyes of an Achaean from 2,000 years ago, but only preserve the plot of the poem. Of course, within the framework of this task to bring the ancient Greek work closer to the Ukrainian reader, the translator deliberately chose a verse meter closer to the reader, more familiar at the time. On the other hand, despite its undoubted current obsolescence, Rudansky's Ilyanyanka is a masterpiece of the Ukrainian poetry of the 19th century, written by a highly gifted and sincere master. It is highly appreciated by the most demanding researchers and historians of our literature. Rudansky's Ilyanyanka is very pleasant to read, and Homer's heroes, in those short clause, as the 12-syllable poem is applied, are somehow closer and more familiar to us than in Homer's hexameters, wrote Ivan Franko once. The statement is not indisputable, but for its time it is quite understandable. And obviously it is not only because of the metric scheme used in the translation, but also in its entire artistic fabric. Homer's heroes are really closer and more relative to us just because the translator consciously brought them closer to us. The typology of Ilyanyanka, this outstanding phenomenon in the history of the Ukrainian artistic translation, was clarified by Mykola Zerov. This translation has great historical and literary significance for us, constituting an important stage in the development of our translated poetry. Homer's poem, in Rudansky's retelling, is a characteristic monument of another era, when literary preferences were formed under the influence of the Ukrainian folk poetic elements, and the talented translators saw Homer only being Ukrainized, presented in the form of a folk song. Excerpts of Iliad were translated by Volodymyr Samilenko. He was able to publish only the first song in 1887. Alexander Biletsky and Samonenko, they published the fragments of the poem as well. Excerpts of Odyssey were translated by Ivan Franko, Lesya Ukrainka, and Panteleimon Kulish. The renewal of translation approaches to the interpretation and mastering of ancient works is associated with the name of the poet, Hellenistic translator, composer, and teacher Petro Nishinsky. His pseudonym is Petro Baida, who graduated from the philological and theological faculties here in Athens and devoted a significant part of his life to the translation of the ancient Greek classics. In 1879 and 1880, he translated the Lay of the Host of Igor into the classical ancient Greek language using hexameter for this purpose. His translation, unfortunately, has not yet been found. In the early 1880s, Nishinsky translated Sophocles' tragedy Antigone, which was published in Lviv journal Zarya and was published in Odessa the same year as a separate edition. We consider this translation following Ivan Franko to be good, although very free. Indeed, the translation set before himself, and this was noted by researchers, not only ideological and aesthetic, but also popularizing tasks, while simplifying to a certain extent the text, in other cases, as Ivan Franko showed, stretching or diluting the poetic fabric to the original work. The next translation by Petro Nishinsky, the pinnacle of his translation work, is Homer's Odyssey, translated into the Ukrainian language using hexameter. He worked on the translation in 1883 and 1887. After the censorship ban on the translation in 1887, the manuscript of the translation was taken to Lviv, and with the assistance of Komarov and Koniski, here it was published. The first complete Ukrainian translation of Homer's poem in hexameter was generally highly praised by reviewers and the Ukrainian public. As Komarov wrote in Lviv Zorya, the language of the translator, Petro Baida, is clear, fresh, sincere, folk, and very close, and in some places it reproduces original to the full. Also, Franko, Zinkivsky, Belay, Kukurudz noted the high quality of the translation, the appearance of which became a notable cultural event. At the same time, the reviewers pointed out certain inaccuracies caused of unjustified Ukrainization of the text and presence of a certain number of Russianisms in it. In general, Ivan Franko was right and believed that after the correction of generally insignificant flaws, this translation will be one of the most beautiful colors of Ukrainian literature. In 1890 and 1895, Petronischinski also worked on a complete translation of Iliad. However, he translated only a part of the poem. Sing-songs have survived, although perhaps there were more of them. He also translated Sophocles, Oedipus the King, but only fragments of this work were found. We believe that the archive of Petronischinski does exist, but it has not yet been discovered. Alexander Potebnya, 1835-1891, the prominent Ukrainian linguist, philosopher, ethnographer, folklorist, literary theorist, researcher of poetics and creative psychology, he played a significant role in the process of assimilation of the ancient heritage by the Ukrainian culture. Taking up the interpretation of Homer's Odyssey, he translated not that much, 275 lines of Canto 3 and the whole Canto 7 and almost the whole Canto 8. Alexander Potebnya translated in hexameter. Although these hexameters were not completely refined and polished, the language of his translations is beautiful and rich. The value of Alexander Potebnya's translation work lies primarily in the rejection from any nostrification of the ancient Greek epic. The essence was that, using the expressive means of the native language, not to subordinate the system of images of the translated poet to them, not to Ukrainize the entire internal atmosphere and everyday circumstances of Homeric poems, as previous generations of Ukrainian translators of Homer did. Searching in the works of Ukrainian literature and folklore for language and stylistic means for an adequate reproduction of Odyssey, Potebnya made several thousand excerpts from Ukrainian sources. Words, their characteristic combinations, synonyms and homonyms, constant epithets, phraseological turns and expressions in juxtaposition with ancient Greek, as well as Polish, Czech, Belarusian, and Russian counterparts. This large-scale preparatory work was, according to Boris Ten, the plowing of the Ukrainian linguistic soil to grow the flowers of Homeric poetry by means of the Ukrainian language. His auxiliary work in connection with the translation of Homer prepared the ground for further steps in mastering Homer by Ukrainian literature. Homeriana by Boris Ten. During the post-war years, there were figures in the Ukrainian Soviet translation, supposedly not on the foreground, who professionally and conscientiously worked on a certain area of their own. And in the end, they secured a well-deserved place in the history. The fate of the writer Boris Ten was, by the standards of his time, so to say, happy. He had an unforgivable sin before the Soviet authorities because in the 1920s he was a priest, and in his guise he, for instance, baptized Mykola Azerov's son. At the beginning of Gorbachev's perestroika, while preparing the writer's bibliography for the book of memoirs about Boris Ten, Sergei Blokhin somehow managed to bypass the vigilance of the censors and to start the literature section of the index from an article in the newspaper Proletarska Pravda from the 21st of December, 1928. The article was called "How They Prepare in a Black Camp," and it said that the autocephalous archpriest Mykola Homachevsky, it's the real name of Boris Ten, from the Church of Peter in Podil, which was destroyed in 1830s, prepared scenes from the sacred history with the children for Christmas. But surprisingly, unlike the vast majority of the Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church clergy, the translator was successful and at a relatively cheap price. During 1930 and 1936, he had to wander in exile to the Far East, but he did not fall under millstones, which at the time ground almost all the priests and the entire episcopate of the autocephalous church. When the writer returned to Ukraine, he was forced to immediately leave for Russia again, where he spent the repressions of 1937 and 1938 in a modest position as a methodologist of the regional house of folk art in Kalinin. When the war began, already a 44-year-old cult worker, Homychevsky, was taken to the front, where he was captured by Germans. In the eerie Novgorod-Siversk camp, the former writer and priest was supposed to be shot. He belonged to an underground group of workers of the local theater, which the occupiers allowed to open, but he survived by chance. And after the war, Boris X got from the party and the government the opportunity to live in provincial Zhytomyr, whereas there was no place for people with such a biography in the capital. Boris X made his debut in 1920s, began to translate from various languages, was presented in the third volume of textbooks on the history of Western literature edited by Biletsky and Plevak, took part in the preparation of the previously mentioned anthology of the French poetry by Zerov, Savchenko, which was never published. Boris X translated from German, Polish, English, Italian. All these translations were completely professional and high quality. But the work of Boris X's life became classical ancient Greek literature. The tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles, the comedies of Aristophanes, and of course, today's considered to be absolutely canonical translations of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The translator's full-scale debut, the complete text of Aeschylus, Prometheus, and Cycled, with a large foreword by Biletsky, took place in 1949, when Boris X, at that time the head of the literary department in the Zhytomyr Regional Theater, turned 52. This very late, due to the circumstances, debut had a fruitful and long-lasting continuation. Already in 1956, a volume of Aristophanes' comedies, Clouds and Lysistrata, Frogs, was published. In 2 cases out of 3, the translator had to turn again to the texts previously translated by Svidzinski. First, Odyssey in 1963 was published in the translation by Boris X, and 15 years later, Iliad in 1878. He receives favorable reviews from Zerov, Biletsky, and Maxim Rylsky. The elderly translator was very afraid that he would not live to finish his work, but he was destined to receive even a proper honor for all this during his lifetime. The literary prize named after Maxim Rylsky for achievements in the field of artistic translation. And further, you will see some excerpts of the translations of Homer's masterpieces into different languages, and Ukrainian hexameters including. I would like to give the floor to my colleague.
Homer's Iliad in original. Menin aedetea peleide vochileus, ulimenen hemuri achaius algiateke, poles diftimos psychas aidi projaxen, heron auton deluria teuche kinesin. Oion site passi, dios de telei tobule, exun de ta prota, diata ten aristante, atre de te anaxandron, kai dios Achilleus. Livius Andronicus translated Odyssey into Latin using the ancient Latin folk rhyming, for example, Saturnian verse. Only 14 separate lines survived. Virum mihi camena in sets versutum, pater noster Saturni filia, mea puera quid verbi, extore supera fuget, tuque mihi narrato, omnia disertimi, Patrim erant nequinont, gratiam redire. A lot of Roman poets used hexameter, but Virgil verse is considered to be perfect. Arma virumque cano, troequi primus aboris. Italiam fato, profugus levineque venet. Litera multilet, teris iactatus et alta. Vis superum seve, memoram iunonis ob iram. Multa quoquet bello, passus dum conderet urbem. Inter requet Deus letio, genus unde latinum. Albanique patres, ad qualtem menia Rome.
So here is the English version. Unfortunately, I'm already out of voice, so you may read. Thank you. And the Ukrainian version of the poem.
Iliad, translation by Boristan. Гнів оспівай, богине, Ахіла сина Пелея. Пагубний гнів, що лиха, багато Ахеям накоїв. Душі славетних героїв навіки послав до Аїду, темного. Їх же самих він хижим лишив на поталу. Псам і птахам, так Зевсова, воля над ними чинилась. Ще відтоді, як в зваді, лихі розійшлись ворогами. Син Атреї володар, мужів і Ахіл богосвітлий. Дякую.
Thank you very much. If you have the questions, you're welcome.
We have time for questions, and of course we will continue with questions after
Okay,
the break.
after.
But
yes.
no. I mean, we start now with some first questions. I would like to ask about, I mean, probably students have more questions than me, but I can start with, I mean, I was wondering about the result of this kind of contact between Greek, of course, ancient Greek
Yeah.
and Ukrainian. What about loanwords or other kind of grammatical borrowing or anything else in Ukrainian?
Yeah, I see. Thank you very much for the question. As even I'm not a specialist in the ancient Greek literature, but to tell you the truth, I may judge from the variant in Ukrainian. The whole spectrum of different characteristics, grammar, vocabulary, rhyming, they were so beautifully preserved by the translator that the Ukrainian version sounds very, very Greek. That is.
Some loanwords that perhaps can be linked to the translation, so
Yeah.
I mean, loanwords in today's Ukrainian.
As for the
from
loan
Greek.
word,
Yes.
there are a lot of them, actually. They were borrowed during the period of ancient Greece. There are numerous borrowings in the medical sphere, for instance. Nowadays, our doctors use a lot of Greek terms. In literature, in music, and in some other spheres, there are a lot of borrowings in our language from the ancient Greek.
So perhaps we can see the role of translation
Yeah.
there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can hear. Yeah.
Speak quite loud. Okay. Hi, I like the variety of translations that were presented because I come from the Greek philology department, so my background is that. And I also find very moving the fact that when we were taught about Homer and Iliad and Odyssey in school, the first thing that was taught to us is that it is an anti-war story, and I find it very, very moving in this background today.
Yeah.
And the other thing I liked very much is that excuse me if I don't pronounce
No
it well.
problem, thank you very much.
The Ilionianska translation.
Ilionianka translation, yes.
Ilionianka, okay. I don't know any Ukrainian yet, but okay.
To tell you the truth, the word actually is half Ukrainian, half Greek. It's Iliad, and the rest of the word is Ukrainian, which means that it belongs to us as well.
Okay. And Well, it brought me to mind the Greek translation by Kazantzakis and Kakridis,
Yes.
which was actually a very literary and closer to the public translation. I mean,
Yes.
it was something that talked to the mind of the people.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was talking about
Yes.
today, because you're always balancing,
Yes.
so to say. On the one hand, you have to be understandable to the potential readers. That is why your translation is supposed to be adapted to their interests, to their needs and whatnot. But at the same time, the original style must be preserved. You see, a lot of our translators actually suffered the same as your authors. I do know well the heritage of Kazantzakis, and I do admire it well. But at the same time, and it depends again on the time about which we're speaking, it is a necessity to adapt the texts. But my humble opinion is that the closer to the original, the better. But it's only a humble opinion of a philologist.
May I ask you something?
Yes, of course.
Following that, I was wondering, knowing that, okay, I teach in the Greek teaching center here,
Yes.
very close to here, and I have many Ukrainian students.
Yeah.
And I know from experience that they know a lot about Greek mythology and Odyssey and Iliad.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if young people in Ukraine try to bring these stories in graphic novels, in books, if there is a new tradition in literature today based on the ancient stories.
Thank you very much for the question. That's the thing we were discussing yesterday with my colleagues. You see, the content always remains the same, just the forms change. That is why everything that was invented by the ancient Greek writers, the ancient Greek scientists, is only rethought nowadays. Everything is already there, the form changes. That is why a lot of the topics, a lot of the heroes, a lot of the motives are present in modern Ukrainian literature. Thank you very much.
Okay, so any other? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, even though I missed the start. Can I ask something? You referred to how close the original the Ukrainian translation was to the original ancient Greek form. So can I ask for a clarification? Did the Ukrainian translators, especially Boris Ten, who was, from what I understood, closest to the original
he was
form,
the best and the closest, yeah.
It seemed.
Yeah.
Did the translation happen directly from ancient Greek, or did they base it?
No, thank you very much. There was no mediatory language at all. He knew the ancient Greek language perfectly well, and it was a direct translation from the ancient Greek into Ukrainian.
And what about the others? Did they base a looser translation on Ukrainian to get to the plot, and then focus more on form and artistic modes, or did they directly translate from ancient Greek?
Thanks. Everything is correct in a sense. Some of them used mediator language, as I mentioned, even Hebrew or Polish or Czech, a lot of them. But some of them translated directly. Some of them, in order to adapt somehow the text to the Ukrainian reality, even studied the Ukrainian folklore and somehow grasped the ideas from there. It depends. There were a lot of different approaches, but still Boris Ten's translation is considered to be the masterpiece and the classical one.
Do you think that Boris Ten was the closest to the original because he directly translated from the original?
He was the closest because he managed to combine both the original and the peculiarities of the Ukrainian languages, so that it sounds perfectly well in Ukrainian and it deeply resembles the ancient Greek.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I don't know if we have any other questions for now, or we continue the discussion.
Yes, of course.
During the break.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
again.
Thank you very much again.
Yeah, can you see my screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, it's here. Everything is all right.
All right, okay, thank you so much. Well, first of all, accept my apologies for not being with you in person, but I do hope we will have many more opportunities ahead of us to see each other and to have this cooperation and exchange between our scholars. And of course, it is an immense honor for me to be among Ukrainian scholars who were kindly invited by your institution to participate in this solidarity campaign, which is absolutely important for our country, for our people. Allow me to express the words of gratitude to those people who organized this event, and of course, in the first place, to Nikos Sifakis, the head of Department of Linguistics, and to our head of Linguistics Department, Professor Zoya Kornever. Just thank you so much for all the efforts you have taken to make this event come true. And it is indeed important to share our scholarly achievements, and what is more important, to get the feedback from our overseas colleagues. That's what we all expect and hope for, further improvement, cooperation in the field of linguistics and translation. It is important for us to spread the word about our achievements. So just hope that this event will turn into lasting, fruitful cooperation between our universities. Thank you so much. And yes, my today's lecture will be dedicated to the so-called subliminal or suggestive potential. And I considered the speeches of political leaders to analyze. And naturally, I'd like to start with introducing the theoretical and methodological background of my research, which is in fact the achievement of Kyiv School of Phonetics. I'm the member of that school, and here you can see the leader of our school, Professor Alla Kaleta, who introduced, well, he's the author of the so-called speech energetics theory, which is, as any other present-day disciplines, is an interdisciplinary approach to the study of phonetic phenomena, since it considers such results of such findings as cognitive studies, psychology, neurostudies, physiology, etc. So my point is that my studies and my present research based on the notions of speech energetics theory. Speaking about subliminal effect as such, I think everybody would agree that we find ourselves in everyday situations under the influence of a word. And this unique and difficult to understand and grasp notion of influence has interested philosophers, scholars, thinkers from the time immemorial. We can trace information about the speech influence from in papers by Aristotle, Cicero, Plato, as well as in their contemporaries, many of these contemporaries and followers. These days, we trace the usage of practices of influence in psychotherapy, in neurolinguistic programming, in medical studies, in political, spiritual practices. Just whenever we find ourselves in, we deal with this purposeful or unpurposeful influence. The quintessence of the speech energetic theory, which is the basis of all our research, is that our speech, both production and perception, is the result of so-called stochastic interconnection of signals we perceive into our psychic sphere. And these signals, they generate psychophysiological energy, okay, which is redistributed between the spheres of the speaker's conscious, subconscious, and unconscious in terms of Sigmund Freud. And these spheres, in fact, are responsible for the choice of the speaker's linguistic and paralinguistic means of communication. Okay? Here is the hypothetical model which presents this redistribution of the energy among the language means. Okay, so to put it more simply, the idea is that we perceive signals from the outer reality, and these signals, they excite certain emotions in our psychic sphere. And these emotions serve as the motive force and the just source which generates our communication and influences upon our perception of the signals. So viewing myself as a speaker, for example, these signals can be responsible for the redistribution of energy, once again, between the spheres of conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, as suggested by Freud. And usually, it's been proved that grammatical and lexical means, they're usually controlled by our conscious sphere. However, as you can see on this scheme presenting mechanism, all nonverbal means of communication, kind of such as facial expressions, gestures, posture, our movement, distance between the speakers, eye movement, etc., as well as intonation means and phonetic means, they are largely uncontrolled. So this notion should be kept in mind while we study subliminal influence upon the speaker, upon the listener. Here I just presented the list of other issues which are within the scope of speech and energetics theory, and they can be viewed in details during our following meetings. So what is the aim of my speech today is to come up briefly with the set of verbal and non-verbal means. Of course, they're interplay. We cannot study them separately. We consider them in interconnection, which in the long run produce that influence upon the speaker. So, as I mentioned, the assumption is that there is the causative consecutive relationship between the semantics of the text, which the speaker perceives on the one hand, okay, gets its pragmatic orientation, evoking certain emotions, and emotions are then responsible for the actual pronunciation, actualization of speech. And on the other hand, we have a listener who, again, perceives these signals, both information, signals which come from the outer reality, whether your state of mind, your state of health, any kind of signals. These signals evoke certain emotional response, or which serves as the stimuli for either trusting the speaker or not trusting. Okay, so emotions is the basis of realizing subliminal influence. That is the idea. Well, at this point, I also want to mention that in numerous linguistic research, we can come across a number of various terms denoting influence. It's a communicative influence, persuasive influence, in persuasive discourse, okay? Then we have manipulative influence as well as neuro-linguistic programming, okay? A lot of them. But the idea is the same. The idea is the same, that these notions denote influence. At this point, I also want to differentiate notions very often confused or used as synonyms among the scholars, that is manipulation versus subliminal effect. Well, of course, manipulation and subliminal effect, they can have the same tactics and means of realization, but the idea of and the result is usually different. Manipulation, as you can see, involves using direct or indirect means of control to influence somebody's action or thoughts. And it usually involves a deliberate, conscious, purposeful effort to deceive a person, mislead a person, get some benefit from a person. Okay, here are some examples in brackets presented for you. So manipulative techniques are such as lying, withholding information, not giving complete information, using flattery charm, okay? Just usually getting the purpose to get somebody do something that the person wouldn't usually do. Subliminal effect, on the other hand, involves using subtle stimuli. Okay, not that obvious, of course, and usually sometimes even the person who influences is not aware of realizing that subliminal effect. This is usually influence beyond the threshold of conscious awareness, again, within aim to influence people. These subtle cues are usually different sense. You can feel, perceive, different are the stimuli which evoke our sensory perceptive organs. Usually these are changes in the music, sound, and many others sensory sources of information which can create emotional response. Okay, so I repeat, the idea of realizing subliminal stimuli, subliminal influence, is having the common emotional ground with the recipient and the speaker. Both, as you can see, manipulation and subliminal effect can be used to influence people. They differ in the degree of awareness and the degree of the control involved. Okay, so manipulation is deliberate. Influence, while subliminal effect is usually the one which is aimed at positive influence upon the person to get certain positive reaction. But again, one more thing to mention, we cannot ignore the fact that rather often in kind of pseudo-communicative situations, we produce involuntary influence. You can always think about your children who manipulate you, wives who manipulate husbands, okay? This is the working definition of the subliminal communicative stimuli, which we follow. So it is the influence upon a person which gets into psychological sphere or psychic sphere of a person through the use of a system of ideological, logical, spiritual, psychological techniques aimed in the first place at changing the mode of the perception of the world, or modes of behavior, algorithms of behavior. Okay, these changes take place in the recipient's psychic sphere, and of course, to get the result as desired by the speaker. So usually there are two basic functional purposes of realizing the subliminal influence. The first one, well, roughly speaking, there are two groups of these functional influences. One, we want to encourage the recipient to do a certain action. On the other hand, we restrain the person to do a certain action, okay? And it should be mentioned that these two actions of the recipient can be divided into two subclasses, namely related to the formation and changes of the ideas, views about the surrounding world, that is the spiritual sphere, or physical, that is related to actual activities I want the recipient to do. So usually we have these two questions. Why am I doing this? And then how am I doing this? Okay, sorry. So in here, I present the typical list of technological ways and devices used. I'm very sorry, I have here some interference. Please be silent. Okay, sorry. So these technological devices usually include like hidden use of power, hidden use of the weaknesses of a person, provocative means, okay, hidden arousal of intention, indirect influence, etc. So this is the usual characteristics of techniques. Now, before we proceed to examples, I also want to draw attention to the fact that looking from the perspective of the recipient, we ought to consider that the information that we get comes from different sources, and this information is of different nature, okay? And usually these stimuli which we get into psychic sphere and then we use while realizing subliminal influence are perceived by visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and gustatory receptors. However, we ought to consider that according to numerous studies, and it is without any doubts, that the visual channel has the maximum information potential, okay? Since through this channel, we receive up to 90% of information. Therefore, we should be aware that propaganda these days, well, not only propaganda, any subliminal influence or manipulative influence, they use images. And as a result, multimodal means of communication, they have been acquiring more and more potential and becoming and are used more and more intensively. So 90% of information we get from by visual channel these days. I mean, if people change, generations change. In younger generation, they need infographics to get information into their psychic sphere. Also, as a reminder, well, speaking about means of communication, here's a reminder that based on findings by Birdwhistle, who is the founder of kinesics, he stated that only 35% of information that we perceive, digest, and use is verbal, while 65% of information is rather nonverbal. To nonverbal means of communication, we include all types of gestures, body posture, all kinetic means, as well as intonation. More recent studies presented by Mehrabian, they state that these days, only 7% of information is transmitted verbally, okay? While 93% rely upon nonverbal means of communication. And here we have 38% devoted to prosodic means, 55% to kinetic means. Prosodic means, we use this term as the synonym to the term of intonation. Here we analyze voice quality, pitch, loudness, temporal variations, all fluctuations of voice, which give clues about emotional loading of a person and feelings experienced. Well, kinetic means, as clearly I've just mentioned, are non-verbal means of communication. So this data proves the importance of considering non-verbal means of communication while analyzing all kinds of influence. Well, I have chosen some examples to share with you by prominent figures who have their followers, who have proved to be successful public speakers and political figures. Just before I come back, I will come back to their personalities. Some more information why a person usually is perceived as the one which has the influence, or also his can be viewed as a charismatic personality. So in order to produce that influence, there should be a certain relationship between the speaker and the audience. Okay, so there should be some connection. The audience should perceive the speaker as the one who has some special traits of character and who's endowed with some exceptional powers. So they should trust him, her. And of course, he should be quite articulate and eloquent with the usage of verbal, non-verbal, and paralinguistic means. Okay, so an influential political leader is supposed, in order to produce that subliminal effect, should have the presented to you traits of character. Of course, he should be an intelligent person. He should radiate self-confidence. He should be persistent in what he does. Okay, he should express his ability to inspire, be sociable, produce dominance. However, narcissism is also important. Okay, he should be aware of him as a leader, and he should have a clear vision he wants to follow with his within his deeds and political career. Just coming back to the chosen leaders, just a reminder that Boris Johnson, who has been a prominent political leader for almost a decade, has recently come to the forefront of political and diplomatic support of Ukraine on this ongoing horrible Russian-Ukrainian war, and he is believed to have influence upon his audience. Also, here you can see Barack Obama, former American president, but the first one Afro-American president of the United States. And here is our president, Volodymyr Zelensky, the current president of Ukraine, who came into office in 2019. Well, he is famous for delivering a number of political addresses, public addresses to his fellow citizens Ukrainians on various issues affecting Ukraine, starting with different, with COVID-19 problems, with economic reform, corruption, war in Ukraine back in 2014. And these days we can hear him every day directing his vision upon the situation in Ukraine, so addressing Ukrainians every single day, every single night. So to summarize, not to summarize, but summarizing my theoretical background, what I was speaking about. So for the speech to have subliminal effect, the charismatic person should be of certain traits. She should have certain traits of character, okay? As well as he should establish emotional relationship. As I repeat, emotions are the basis of realizing that influence, okay? So it should be able to produce certain effect on the self-concept of the audience, okay? As a result of this, the subliminal effect will be resulted in their commitment and their performance. he should be able to create the sense of collective identity, and that persons he addresses to should feel as the member of the group with a noble pride, a noble cause, noble purpose. Okay? Having that emotional relationship, political public speaker should be able to boost confidence in the listeners. Okay, they should believe that they can achieve certain outcomes together. Okay, as well as enhancing the audience's individual and collective self-esteem, self-worth, self-efficiency or efficacy. Well, I'm going to analyze briefly a speech of our president, which has become already a historical speech or memorable. At least it was powerful, which was delivered at the joint meeting at US Congress quite recently. It was in December 2022. Well, I have just presented here the link. I will share with you my presentation. The link shows the most striking, influential, and powerful utterances spoken to the Congress by our president. And here you can see the example. Your money is not charity, but rather an investment in global security and democracy. Okay? Already we can see the contrasted ideas. Okay? Charity, democracy, money, global security. Okay? He already triggers the keywords, drawing attention to what is most important. Looking at his posture and judging by his appearance, we can see that this is a confident person, open person, delivering his message to US Congress. I have summarized the most frequently used rhetorical devices by our president. And I hope you will listen to, or you have already listened to his speech, and you can feel how powerful they are in connection with intonation and his nonverbal means. Okay, so he uses OPORA. Okay, so this is the stylistic device, which includes what? Asking question and immediately answering that question. Okay. An example is, we have artillery. Yes, thank you. We have it. Is it enough? Honestly, not really. This is a technique which usually creates the sense that the speaker is already in the dialogue with the audience. Okay? And usually the speaker asks the question, which is subconsciously the listener wants to ask already. So it is already on the mind of the listener. And then he answers the question, so arousing already the response. First curiosity, and then responsive reaction from the audience. I want to emphasize that he uses timely pauses between question and the answer. Okay, you know, the pause becomes eloquent. Okay, he gives the audience chance to think and then gets the same answer, which already is invoked by implicitly invoked by the speaker. Okay, so it shows that the speaker is in the control of the audience, okay, and gives the audience the information which it wants to hear. A number of rhetorical questions. Okay, our president is quite famous for using this device. Here is an example. How can people who gave more than 8 million lives for the victory over Nazism support Nazis? How could I be Nazi? Okay, so usually by these questions, while tracing his speeches, he shows the absurdity of this war, of this alleged drawing on how we Ukrainians are, who we are. Parallel constructions. Parallel constructions are from my personal experience, are a rather powerful tool of influencing the audience. Since here we see the mutual, monodirected influence of all language means. So we have repetition of lexical units, repetition of grammatical structure, and when you listen to its intonation organization, there's repetition of the same intonation pattern. So as a result, you can hear the isochrony of pronunciation of the sentence. And here is an example about victory. And we don't have to know everyone's wish, as we know that all of us, millions of Ukrainians, wish the same: victory, victory, only victory. These repetitions can be of any type, like mirror repetition, anaphoric repetition, cataphoric repetition. This is the technique which anchors the basic ideas, keywords, okay? And working together with intonation, usually having high falling tones or widened direction. I'm sorry I cannot show you the sounding right now, but you can listen to the speech by the given link. Repetition of one and the same word in the successive sentences or clauses, or just whole phrase at the end of the sentence, gets attention of the listener, anchoring to the basic idea. Okay, and all this gives the same rhythmic pattern. We come across wordplay. Here is an example of the word patriot. If your patriots stop the Russian terror against our cities, it will let Ukrainian patriots work to the full to defend our freedom. Okay, patriots as the weapon that we need to stop Russian terror is contrasted by patriots, Ukrainian people who do all their best to stop it. Okay, so again, we have two keywords which are drawn together and anchored in the mind of the recipient. He also uses quotations, the use of quotations. Quotations believed to be both explicit as an implicit appeal to the audience, referring to history. Okay, our president's speech is compared to Churchill's address to the U.S. Congress in 1991, soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and he even used the same, or similar wording to address the Congress. Okay, and certainly it evoked trust already and respect to the president, and direct quotation. So this is implicit appeal to history, and there is explicit appeal to history. He quoted directly President Franklin Roosevelt, quoted his speech when he addressed to the nation after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And what he said is, standing here today, I recall the words of the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which are, I think, so good for this moment. The American people in their rightest mind will win through to absolute victory. This is the quotation, what was said by President Roosevelt. Our president adds, the Ukrainian people will win too, finishing absolutely. Okay, so it gives, it's kind of a central idea of his speech. We need resources, more military resources. We need to secure assistance, military assistance, which is so much needed. And summarizing, considering his non-verbal means, of our president's non-verbal means. As I mentioned, he clearly uses parallel construction, which result in isochronic pronunciation of the adjacent intonation groups. Okay, it creates trust. Identical intonation patterns, short syntactic structures, okay, also attract attention and produce trust or generate trust of this listener. Categoric, confident, of low falling tones of a wide range work the same. Radiate confidence of the speaker. Properism, the same duration of pauses, so prevalence of short intonation groups. All this serves to create the whole atmosphere of getting involved into the speech. Speaking about segmental level, you can also trace the repetition of similar sounding as the consonant vowels, assonance, alliteration, or using the same word groups, as well as the confident voice quality. All this translates that he is confident, he is firm in what he wants to do, he is resolute, and people trust him. Okay, I did mention the body language, his posture. Okay, being in the most natural position is the most influential position. That is the posture the leader should have. And he used absolutely corresponding gestures, frowns, subtle smiles, and always maintaining eye contact. All this resulted in a positive outcome of his speech. If I have time, do you have time? I'm sorry. It's already 4 p.m. Can I continue? I don't want to bore you, to make you feel bored. My further examples, just briefly, I will go through my further examples. As I mentioned, these days, highly influential are multimodal means of communication, which use images to portray our political leaders. What should we consider while analyzing images? Well, this is the image of Barack Obama used during his 2008 electoral campaign, with the motto, "This is our moment." Among multimodal devices, we come across so-called multimodal lexemes. These are lexemes which comprise built-in symbols. They're everywhere these days. Here we can see this is our moment. Okay, O, inside the O is the logo of his election campaign. The color scheme suggests the color of the national flag. And I will follow a few examples here. Yes, we can. Okay, and we've got his back. Everywhere, in every image of politician, you will come across the idea of verbal signal of togetherness. We are together. We are the one. We can do it. Okay. This picture again, you can see color scheme red, white, blue, referring to the national identity. At the background, you can see the national flag. However, Barack Obama is in a black and white color. So this is another technique showing that we are equal, we are the same. There's no difference between us. Proxemics speaks about closeness to his people. So all these pictures, they form the trust to the that personality. Here also some pictorial graphical presentations of the image of Boris Johnson. He didn't have his election campaign, but he was the one who was working or leading Great Britain from or to the Brexit from European Union. So he had much on his hand to do with economics, with reforms, and similar to Barack Obama's pictures, there's always proximity to ordinary people. He's one amongst them. Here's the address that we are together. Together we will build our way back to health. Build, okay. Repetition. And here you can see again a build back better. Again, powerful, plosive shows certainty, firm determination to do what he needs to do. And again, color scheme resembles or in the same hues as the Union Jack colors, British flag. Summarizing, okay, so to have this subliminal influence, we have to stay tuned, in other words, with our interlocutor. Okay, the staying tuned can be achieved by keywords, repeating them, triggering the necessary emotions, feelings, attitudes, and by way of pronouncing on the one, not in a monotonous manner, but follow the isochrony of your speech, rhythmicality of your speech, confirming confidence, showing confidence by your voice, by your posture, by your attitude. In such a way, we create that common rhythmic and melodic speech continuum with our listeners. Reframing, I didn't give you examples of reframing, but as an the usage of quotation can be used as a reframing when the speaker addressing to one well-proved point shows another one which is close to him, in such a way encouraging listeners to do something. Okay. Well, targeting, congruency, I was speaking about that. And well, this here I have my conclusions explained in details. As I mentioned, first of all, there should be common emotional content in order to realize this subliminal influence. But we also have to consider the recipient. This is another sphere yet to be studied. What is here? The final point is we have these days technical possibilities to study the speaker's reaction, how he responds to this stimuli, verbal, non-verbal stimuli, by using a number of devices such as tomographic scanner, magnetic resonance imaging, encephalography, indicators of blood pressure, etc. So we have to study the recipient in order to have a complete mechanism of how subliminal stimuli works. So far, we study only by surveying our interlocutors, respondents, audience, just judging by their reaction. However, we have to consider a number of factors like social-cultural level. Speech of a person depends a lot whether he addresses to, well, workers on the factory, for example, or to the members of US Congress. We have to consider how much, well, about the education of a person, about how much taboos work in his subconscious or her subconscious, etc. Okay. Of course, situation is important, but my point so far is that we are to study thoroughly how interplay verbal and non-verbal means. Non-verbal means comprise, in the first place, intonation, all para-linguistic means, as well as these days, graphical images present powerful, intensive influence on the recipient. Well, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for being so, not maybe getting into details. I will stop sharing, right? Okay. But you're welcome to ask questions, and you can read in details in the papers. So this is the sphere of our Kiev School of Phonetics, studied by the head of the school and our postgraduate students. Thank you so much for your attention. Again, I'm sorry for being online, not in person.
It was great, very interesting. I hope you can hear us now. No?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry, maybe.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we have time for questions and discussion. Let's start the discussion. And of course, we are looking forward to having you here in Athens very soon.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larissa. We enjoyed your work very much. And I'm sure this applies, I mean, what you said applies to political leaders and when people would like to be persuasive, obviously. I was just wondering, could this theory be used for the stage? For the theatre?
Oh, yes.
I was just wondering.
Of course, I think that what I said at the end, that we need to consider the audience to have this complete picture, how a combination of verbal and non-verbal means work together. We consider in the first place political leaders because we know that they have influence, they have their followers and people respond, so they definitely are influential. But on the stage, in the classroom, when we teach, we also have, well, it can be started by researching, by collecting information, how our students, how audience, well, in the theater, for example, reacts. That's my dream, to have a kind of a laboratory experiment when we can have all these devices used to see how, in Euro populations of the person's cognitive sphere reacts. Having those flashes, that means that it is the reaction, and we need to come up with a set of these means which influence the recipient in different situations. I'm sure that maybe some KGB secret organization have this already, but we need to have it at the new interdisciplinary stage, considering present day technologies, possibilities, lots of devices. So let us cooperate and come up together with how audience reacts.
Right.
But that's the further step.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. It was actually quite interesting because it wasn't about culture, it was about communication. And I have a question. You said that the audience plays a large role in how the speaker formulates a speech or an image, or in order to transmit a message.
To influence. Mm-hmm.
Yes. The majority of the examples you showed were of the Western type, and you said that the audience plays a large role. Do you think that the same techniques could be used in maybe another time period, or for different people like the Asians, or I don't know, maybe to someone different?
The idea is the speaker, in order to have that influence upon the audience, should find this common emotional ground. Okay, and yes, we do need to consider the socio-cultural and the national specificity in particular of the audience. So it doesn't mean that these very clues I have come up with can work in, as you say, Asian culture. What I believe will work is that isochrony of rhythmicality, posation, these means prove to have influence upon us as human beings. But we choose our language means depending on who we are talking to. Okay, and I was thinking about examples. So usually short, brief sentences, simple vocabulary, they work with, so to say, middle class representatives of the audience. Longer sentences, more elaborate and eloquent vocabulary is more attractive to also type of audience. I'm not distinguishing here, but it is a fact that gender should be considered, national identity, your educational background, and lots of other factors which are called extra-linguistic, which, yes, can be considered. So we have to find this, we have to stay in tune with the audience. So audience should be started before we embark on getting to our result while influencing it.
All right, but can we tinker a little with these basic techniques in order to for them to be applicable in every possible circumstance?
I guess, yes, those techniques which I enumerated, so they have been taken, as I mentioned, from the time of Aristotle, who studied the power of a prayer, okay, up to these days. They are believed to be universal techniques which can influence a person.
Yeah, that's why I asked. They were pretty familiar, that's why. Thank you.
Yes. They're traditionally, historically, or conventionally accepted.
Great. So, I don't know if we have any other questions before we thank again Larissa. Okay, so Larissa, we thank you very, very much for...
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm sorry that I couldn't let you listen to some fragments, but I will send you my presentation. So those who are interested can go to the website and listen to samples of intonation organization of those most powerful sentences. Thank you so much. I do hope that we will have more chances to meet and have this exchange, scholarly exchange. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone. So before I start my little presentation, my little report about how our education system adapted to these incredibly difficult conditions of first COVID and then the war, I would like wholeheartedly say thank you to all people who were involved to the organization of this event, this incredible cooperation between Ukraine and Greece, which is the first case of this cooperation, in particular between our universities. That's incredible, so thank you very much. And personally to Nikos Lavidas, thank you very much for this, your all effort, and to Olga, who also take care of us and organize not only our scientific part, but our also getting acquainted with Greek culture, which is incredible. So thank you very much again. So it works. The other way. Okay, thank you. As you can see on this slide, I will be speaking about the education in crisis period. And I would like this way. Yes, everything's okay. Yeah. So in the United Nations report, Transform Education Summit, it was stated that the world is witnessing an alarming of people affected by armed conflict, forced... Mike, right? Right, can be. Okay, let's check.
Travado.
Okay, does it work? Yes, okay. So the world is witnessing an alarming increase in the number of people affected by armed conflict, forced displacement, including large-scale refugee displacement, health and climate-induced crisis, and other typical problems. So this means disrupted education for 222 million school-age children and youth worldwide, and education system pushed to the brink of their capacities. And unfortunately, Ukraine's share in these statistics is quite big. The education system, and in particular higher education in Ukraine, faced two consecutive crises: COVID-19 pandemic and the armed aggression of the Russian Federation, both have an immense effect on the functioning of the system. On the background of the war, of course, the pandemic faded. However, it can be said that the experience which we gained and developed in its conditions proved to be invaluable during the second crisis. In fact, there are some similar features between these two hardships. The COVID-19 pandemic can be characterized by seasonal nature, with periods of splashes and relatively steady periods. The disease also proved to be more dangerous to certain categories of people. Some precautions, like hygienic rules, quarantine restrictions, could be taken to lessen the potential harm from the COVID. Apart from some reasonable limitations, like using public transport or attending crowded places, the systems of infrastructure were not influenced. In contrast, under the conditions of war, people are in danger all the time. Missile or other type of strike is unpredictable, equally threatening children, youth, adults, and older people. Critical infrastructure and communication systems also face damages or become irreparable, causing substantial difficulties in ensuring basic needs of citizens. One factor that is common in the mentioned crisis periods is the inability of students, partial or complete, to regularly attend lessons due to the danger of health or their very life. So, it started. Everything's okay. So the first case of COVID-19 infection was diagnosed in Ukraine on the 3rd of March 2020. Soon after, on 11th of March, the all-Ukrainian quarantine was announced, which meant suspending the activity of all educational establishments, and this led to a full stop of education in Ukraine. But in April, the need to secure the basic need of people to education led to resuming the studying in a remote, online, or sometimes blended mode. Teachers faced a lot of difficulties, starting from the basic lack of technical equipment or proper internet connection on the part of a teacher or a student, lack of experience, lack of skills of using technical means of education, and a lot of emotional and psychological stress. Well, the results of many research indicate also to a lot of social, economic, organizational, educational, psycho-emotional, technical, and sanitary problems which occurred in this period. The possibility to restart offline classes varied in time in different parts of Ukraine, as flexible approach to quarantine restrictions was applied in the state. Higher education institutions in Ukraine enjoy relatively independent right to organize their mode of study. So when the state quarantine restrictions were lessened, some of them came back to offline study with multiple interruption zones, and some of them applied blended or distant learning modes of instructions. So almost 3 years after the start of the pandemic, as of 1st March 2023, the number of all-time cases of COVID in Ukraine accounted for 5,382,000, among which there are 111,000 deaths. Ukraine took 10th place in Europe by the number of cases and 23rd place in the world by the number of deaths due to COVID. Assessing the impact of the pandemic on education, researchers worldwide agree that the coronavirus pandemic has changed the landscape of higher education and became not only a health crisis, but also an educational one. And though for school, COVID-19 scale of education loss is nearly insurmountable, as warns UNICEF, the experience of online teaching in higher education seems to demonstrate some positive results. So among the achievements of technical development due to COVID, some researchers state that they would like to continue implementing videos, simulations, inverted classrooms, learning management systems. after period of COVID. They also would like to continue using AI assistant grading, addition of social worker, which can help students who have some emotional or psychological problems due to feeling of isolation or other kind of problems. So spotlighting the problems of inequitable learning environment and positive transformation of old pedagogy, teachers also say that the pandemic opened the opportunities of including web-based teaching, especially in developing countries where web-based and also technological teaching did not happen before this pandemic. Some go even further and state that blended or online learning may eventually substitute the traditional chalk and talk face-to-face teaching. Yeah. However, all this achievement, they could have been implemented and continued in Ukraine, but another crisis happened and everything faded on the background of the war. Which started on the 24th of February 2022. The impact of the war on education in Ukraine is drastic. It meant not only the disability to continue studying, but also jeopardized the very life of participants to education process, leading to their forced displacement and physical destruction of educational establishments. So on the next slide, you can see the buildings of our universities. These are not houses, these are just universities in Kiev, in Kharkiv. They were damaged by missile attacks and they are burned and completely destroyed. So this is our reality, which we adapt to, which we are facing every day. So just this night, there was another missile attack on Ukraine. You probably didn't heard about that, but we were attacked by roughly 100 missiles, which were just launched on the territory of Ukraine, and they hit our infrastructure. So in Kiev, a lot of people, they stay without heating. It's cold in winter in Kiev, so this means that we are facing another challenge, but I hope that they will repair this infrastructure and we will have heating again. So, yes. The number of refugees who fled Ukraine for other countries since the beginning of the war is more than 18 million persons. The Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine reports 2,619 educational institutions have been damaged by bombing and shelling. Another 406 are completely destroyed. The statistic is given as of 23rd December 2022. Well, we are not alone in this situation. Some negative experience was also shared by other educational systems in the world who faced conflicts or wars. So among devastating effects of war in Yemen on educational system, researchers list the displacement, discrimination, the use of children as fighters for the future, the conflict of identities among children, the destruction of children's physical and mental health, the exploitation of education for financial benefits, the normalization of negative behaviors, and the destruction of teachers' dignity. Assessing the potential effect of civil conflict in Basque region, some researchers come to the conclusion that individuals living in conflict areas tend to acquire higher education with the high probability of migration to other countries. So we can relate to these results of the research. And when I studied this area of research, it seems like in every country which experiences armed conflict or civil conflict, the effects are quite the same, and they are not positive by any case. So in Afghanistan, for example, researchers came to the conclusion that continuing education is only possible if great investment in education system are taken, and some revolutionary steps are also taken. However, authors came to a sad conclusion that nothing constructive can be fully realized as long as the country is in a state of war. Well, for Ukraine, the only... Oh, now it's... Yes. For Ukraine, a way to continue education in the conditions of war was found in the wide application of online and blended modes of teaching, a trend which is developing rapidly worldwide and supported by the United Nations, which declares that teaching must be transformed and the digital revolution is the key to transformation. In its report of 2022, it is indicated that if properly harnessed, connectivity and open, accessible digital teaching and learning resources can contribute to transformation and democratization of education. So on this slide, you can see a professor of one of the Ukrainian universities who's given lecture straight from a trench. He volunteered to go to the army in the first days of war, but he couldn't suspend his teaching. So he, if I'm not mistaken, on Tuesday and Thursdays, he was given lectures to his students. He used mobile to connect to them, to go online and to deliver lectures. And his comrades in the military, in the army, they organized their activities, their shifts, and they disseminated their duties so that he could perform these 2 hours of lectures on Tuesday and Thursdays. So that's amazing, but that is how we can compare when we hear air raid alarm and the sirens, citizens go to shelters and education goes online. Like online is a safe environment for everybody to take, and we use it to continue our teaching. So in our research, we wanted to ask some teachers about how their attitude to online and blended learning changed after COVID pandemic and after the war. So we wanted to formulate some research questions. So the first one, as I mentioned, how the attitudes have changed. The next one, do teachers believe their skills of online teaching are enough to teach online? And the third one, do educators want to retain online or blended learning, or do they want to go offline, to resume offline teaching? So the research was organized in 4 stages, starting from March 2021 and ending 2023. So in March 2021, we disseminated the questionnaire among teachers, and you can see here the location, geography of location. The respondents are from all over Ukraine. You can see Ukraine is a very, very big country, and we've got many educational centers. Traditionally, Kiev and Kharkiv are like the biggest educational centers of Ukraine. Kharkiv is to the east, you can see it on the map, and Kiev at the heart, the capital of Ukraine. But there are many, many educational institutions, and we, by the snowball methodology, a teacher asked another teacher from a university, professors asked professors, so we collected these answers. So we, during the first wave, we had 41 educational institutions, participants, and the second wave included only 25 higher educational institutions. Well, this can be explained, of course, by the conditions of war, and we have a lot of professors, a lot of teachers who were forced to stop their educational activity. They may be changed universities, or they were among those people who took shelter in other countries, who fled Ukraine. So the first question which we asked our respondents was addressed the issue of online or blended teaching experience prior to the pandemic and the war. So in 2023, after the first crisis and the year since the beginning of the war, the number of teachers with the relevant online or blended experience increased significantly to 88.4% compared to only 22.9% in 2021. The attitude towards online study shifted only in some aspects. The respondents generally still see time-saving, opportunities to use multimedia content, access to information, possibilities of automated grading of the test as the advantages of online study. However, in 2023, less respondents believed that online study can offer such advantages as broader possibilities of learning process organization, 42% compared to 33% in 2023, modern means of study materials presentation, as well as easier contact with students. This interesting result is probably due to the fact that online study during the war is impaired by often power outages. So when it all started in, I guess, the end of October, the beginning of November, when the Russian Federation, they slightly changed their policy and they start to attack civilian infrastructure. So we were often had power outages, and this, of course, meant that we couldn't give even online lectures. But we found a way in different types of asynchronous studies, so education didn't stop this time, we continued, but in slightly different form. Well, as for the disadvantages of online study, advantages. Let's start from the positive sides. So among the advantages, as I mentioned, generally, all the teachers meant that online study can guarantee the continuation and not suspending of the educational activity. And you can see on the slide some other options which they mentioned. And the disadvantages, the majority of our teachers, they of course mentioned technical issues. It was 68% in 2021 and 71% in 2023. An interesting shift occurred in the assessment of the impossibility to properly explain materials online. When we first asked teachers in 2021, they thought that it's quite impossible to deliver the material, to deliver their ideas online. But already in 2023, the number fell to only 5.8%. So generally speaking, professors now have no problems of adapting their materials in the way that that students will understand. So I see that the technical way of delivering your ideas is not a problem anymore. And that's great, because I think that's really, that is very prospective form of education, online and blended modes. So when asked about which type of learning activities are easy to adapt and transfer online, both in 2021 and 2023, the majority named lectures and theoretical instructions and student self-work. However, in 2023, more respondents believe that online mode properly fits practical lessons, and this was 47.8% compared to 27% in 2021. On the contrary, less respondents think that ongoing monitoring and grading are easy to conduct online. Probably this is due to the problem of cheating, which is of course very, very widespread problem with online and blended learning. Reflecting on the changes in the personal style of teaching, in both waves of survey, the respondents mentioned that they plan lessons in a different way, reorganize types of work during the lessons, and conduct more active search for new materials and use more internet resources. Interestingly, with some educators started to allocate less time to holding students' attention during the classes. This probably is because students and professors, teachers also get used to this online mode, and they start to, students start to behave. The number of those who research new methods of content presentation, organization of group work also fell from 74 to 59%. Again, this is because with experience, professors believe they are more confident in delivering and different modes of delivering their lectures and their materials. Educators were also asked to choose from the roles of a teacher which they think are most relevant during online study. The majority chose the role of a tutor, stressing importance of lesson conduct, selection of content, creation of feedback mechanism. The importance of the role of a teacher as a mentor who fosters intellectual development and offers emotional support slightly raised in the eyes of the respondents. We also can observe the increase in the answers on importance of the role of a teacher as a coordinator. Some interesting changes were observed in the general assessment of online teaching. While in 2021, the majority, 60%, believed it to be developing, offering development of professional skills and competences. In 2023, most respondents chose the option perspective, admitting high potential for future use. The number of respondents who believe online teaching to be demanding and requiring some extra time and effort fell from 54 in 2021 to 40% in 2023. Only about 11% of the respondents in both waves believed online teaching to be ineffective. And when choosing the most demanding and difficult model of teaching, in 2021, 41% of respondents indicated to online teaching. And in 2023, most respondents answered that it was blended teaching. So we start to like online teaching more, definitely. Undoubtedly, 3 years of active implementation of online teaching led to accumulation of experience in this sphere. Thus, 63.8% of respondents stated that their current skills of online teaching are sufficient, in comparison to 52.9% in 2021. Yet some quarter of the respondents, 27.1%, still need additional technical training. And the final question in our questionnaire related to the mode of teaching in which the educators wanted to continue working. In both ways, respondents chose blended teaching, though with the number of proponents slightly fell from 61.4% in 2021 to 42% in 2023. Nevertheless, educators seem to enjoy the benefits of both online and traditional types of teaching and would like to use them in their blended classrooms. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that education plays one of the most necessary roles in a modern society. Though that in the developed countries, it, along with other basic state services, has been taken for granted. It is a crisis period that can demonstrate the true value of such an achievement of modern society. Ukraine case study illustrates how it proved to be necessary to continue education process even during the most acute crisis periods, pandemic and the war. The year 2020 will be marked in history by the unprecedented in the 21st century pandemic of COVID-19, which has drastically influenced literally every part of human life. Education, as one of the most irreplaceable and engaging spheres of human activity, faced the urgent need to rethink and reorganize teaching process overnight. Education has changed and it became common to have students learning distantly and teachers mastering virtual learning environments. Never could we predict that this experience would be invaluable during another crisis period of war. When on 24th February 2022, Ukraine was invaded by the Russian troops, no one thought about continuing teaching and studying. However, higher education is a very flexible system. We have taken into account all the achievements and all the positive developments of pandemic teaching and studying, and quickly adapted even to these horrible conditions of war. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much.
Some questions maybe.
Yes, we have time for questions and discussion. Questions? I was wondering about secondary education. I mean, you said that, of course, with higher education, it is probably easy. It can be flexible, but what about the other?
Thank you very much. Yes, in Ukraine, higher education institutions have their own possibilities to organize education. So part of the universities, they go offline, part of the universities continue working online or remotely. But as for the secondary education and primary education in Ukraine, so the work of schools was resumed this September. But I would say that the classes are constantly interrupted by these missile attacks. We have got air raid sirens on, and children, they have got to go to shelter. And sometimes they spend in the shelter more time than they spent in the classroom. So it was another problem when Ukraine and Ukrainian schools, they had to prepare the shelters themselves, because I would say that they were in a horrible condition when they were started. So that's another point. A lot of investment and a lot of money was invested to this sphere. And for example, my daughter, who goes to kindergarten, couldn't go to kindergarten for more than a year because they didn't have proper shelter. So that's why this is a very difficult question. My colleague, one of my colleagues, she is present today, often complains about getting children ready for school, doing all the home tasks, going to school, which can take half an hour, only to go to the classroom and to hear a raid siren and to go to shelter and then home. So that is disappointing, of course. But nevertheless, schools also continue working even offline. They try to, at least.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I would like to ask two questions that are connected in a way. All these methods you mentioned about online classes and the results that came out of them, are they referring to only public education or private education too? Like, are these only state universities?
Thank you for your question. Yes, actually, our questionnaire was aimed only at state universities. The questionnaire was not disseminated among public universities and establishments, but I think they can be extrapolated because the conditions are literally the same. So I think that can be extrapolated even to public establishments.
Yeah, because they're on the same place, same country. Also, are these valid? Are these results valid for schools on all parts of the country, or like only the east part that was mostly attacked? Right. If I'm correct.
Well, actually, I don't have presentation. If you remember the map, the respondents were located all over Ukraine, but for the eastern part. That is because in the east we have got active phase of armed conflict, and part of the territory of Ukraine, unfortunately, is occupied by the Russian troops. So we cannot reach them, and we cannot take the answer from that part of Ukraine. But the rest part, which is under control of Ukrainian government and where the educational institutions operate, they gave this answer. So this like general answers from them.
Thank you for the clarification. I completely forgot about it.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? We thank you, Julia, very, very, very much for your
Thank you.
presence
Thank
here
you.
and your lecture. Okay. So we started, huh? And we start. This is the purpose of the event. First day, actually. So the 2-day event of the lectures can be the first day of our cooperation, huh? And this is something we hope for. I don't have words to thank our colleagues from Ukraine. Zoya Kornieva, Irina Bobenchuk, Olesya Zdanovic, Larisa Taranenko, Yulia Baklazenko, Olga Demidenko, and Professor Viktor Stavnik Webex. We thank them all for their lectures, for the knowledge and ideas they shared with us. We know it was not easy for them to travel to Athens, and it was not easy for them to arrange all necessary issues to participate in the event, but they should always remember they always have friends at this corner of Europe. I would like to thank SLE, the Linguistic Society of Europe, its president, Ari Verhangen, its vice president, Magdalena Rembel, and its secretary, Bert Kornig, the University of Athens and its rector, Thanos Dimopoulos, the School of Philosophy and its dean, Achilleas Haldeakis, the Faculty of English and its head, Kikini Kiforidou, the Department of Language Linguistics and its head, Nikos Ifakis, OPORA Center of the Ukrainian Community of Athens and Olya Ritsagivska, our students for their help and presence and questions, our collaborators here, Sofia Hionidi, Thanos Patras, Maria Episkopou, Eleni Nasi, Olga Marinova, Natasha Tsiropina. We had 2 wonderful days here, and I thank them all very, very much. We're preparing a video of the event, including English subtitles for its Ukrainian and Greek parts. These 2 days can form an example of how essential and fruitful this kind of collaboration can be. We need your ideas of how we can strengthen the collaboration and support. My first efforts include the following. Open our online civis course on diachronic linguistics, open our Naxos summer school program, and for the time offer a hybrid form of it, open the future summer programs in translation to all members of the Ukrainian community of Athens and to the Ukrainian academia and Ukrainian students. We will ask the help of, and we need the collaboration of SLE and CIVIS and all European institutions that can help in this. Moreover, we prepared joint projects for EU funding as well. A second idea and effort is to establish forms of oral language practice between Greek students and Ukrainian students who are learning Greek or who are learning English. This can start as an online forum of oral conversation and can become something more formal in the near future. We are here to help in this. Another idea, a scientific publication on the connection between Ukraine and Greece, starting with the lectures of the 2-day event. And probably then, continuing with popular articles in newspapers and blogs. And also offering lectures online and in person, both to the Ukrainian community here and Greeks who are interested in learning more and getting involved. Another idea, a center and a laboratory for the Ukrainian language linguistics in relation to English and Greek with a comparative diachronic approach as a part of our scientific projects. Let me close my few thoughts by repeating our full support. Mi wzi Ukraińcy, mi wzi ukraiński naukowcy, mi razem z ukraińskim narodem. We are all Ukrainians, we are all Ukrainian scholars, we stand with the Ukrainian people.